T9C got the fucking juice.
Silver's the new gold.
Take this shit serious.
What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the JT Sports Podcast. If you tuned into our previous episode live, you would know that we got interrupted because my software and laptop just decided to crash out of nowhere. It happens every 2 to 3 months, so I apologize for that. But coming back on here to finish what we had on deck for the previous episode, going to be discussing what's the biggest problem with the Buffalo Bills, why they might need to make a big change. Got some interesting thoughts on the Seahawks versus Cowboys and the Washington Huskies taking on Oregon in the Pac-12 Championship. And we're also going to touch on Colorado's recruiting, why it's a little bit disappointing in my opinion. Before we get into it, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, turn on post notifications so you don't miss when we go live. And check out the audio version of tonight's episode. Every episode that's uploaded on the channel is available in audio format on all podcasting platforms: Apple, Google, Spotify, Amazon. Wherever you get your podcast from, you can find the JT Sports Podcast. If you enjoyed tonight's episode, we would greatly appreciate it if you give us a 5-star review on Apple and Spotify. Share the pod with your friends, family members, and acquaintances as well. Okay, the Buffalo Bills seem to be in free fall mode. They're now 10th in the AFC when it comes to making it into the playoffs. And you look at that game against the Philadelphia Eagles and the way they lost that game, the fact that their offense wasn't the reason why they lost, even though you had that miscommunication between Josh Allen and Gabe Davis. The defense didn't hold up their end of the bargain. And once again, this is another big game that Buffalo loses that comes down to one possession. They're 2-6 in one possession games this year. And this defense just folded like sandpaper in the biggest moments when they needed them to step up the most. And what's even more embarrassing is that this is another instance this season when you got a defensive-minded coach in Sean McDermott, and when his defense needs to get a stop to win the game, they aren't able to get it done. You remember when they allowed Mac Jones to lead the Patriots to a come-from-behind victory on a game-winning drive? That's embarrassing. Even dating back to when they lost to Kansas City in overtime years ago. The defense lost that game too. Josh Allen didn't get a chance to get another opportunity with the rock in that possession because the defense didn't allow him to. Sean McDermott is a defensive-minded coach, but anytime his defense is put in a situation where it has to win the game, it doesn't get the job done. And Sean McDermott to me, seems to be the biggest issue with the Buffalo Bills. I think it's now time for them to move on from Sean. Look, he's one of the best head coaches in the NFL. This dude wins over 60% of his games. He's definitely going to get another head coaching opportunity. But his time in Buffalo, it's over. The Bills have peaked under him as their head coach. Ever since they lost to Kansas City, they haven't been able to reach that same level of success. You signed Von Miller in free agency. He hasn't been what you hoped him to be. Yeah, you got a really good defense, but when it's time for your defense to execute in big moments against good teams, they fold. And if you're a defensive-minded coach and this continues to happen, you can only blame turnovers. You can only blame your offensive coordinator so much until you have to look at yourself in the mirror and say, you're the problem. And it's funny because he got rid of Leslie Frazier. They say Leslie Frazier stepped down, but let's be honest, he most likely fired Leslie Frazier. He was scapegoated. When Sean McDermott really is the problem. You see, not every head coach is built to get every team that they coach with to the Super Bowl. Andy Reid was with Philadelphia for hell of years, and he got fired. He wasn't able to win them a Super Bowl. There are plenty of good coaches that weren't able to get it done despite having success with their first team. Tony Dungy, same situation with him. The NFL has seemed to trend to an offensive direction, and that's probably where the Buffalo Bills need to head if they were to part ways with Sean McDermott. The defense doesn't come through in the big moments. Maybe you get an offensive-minded coach who can hire a good defensive coordinator, and that would change. Maybe it comes down to situations when the offense has an opportunity to win the football game. Sean McDermott is a really good coach, but his time with Buffalo has expired. And the longer you hold on to this guy, the longer you're going to continue to get the same results. Josh Allen is one of the best quarterbacks in the league, even with all his turnovers. This dude played an incredible game against the Philadelphia Eagles. But in the fourth quarter, this team just fell apart. And you can't blame Joe Brady. You can't blame the offensive coordinator. The defense is to blame. And there has been way too many times throughout Sean McDermott's tenure with the Bills over the last couple of seasons when this defense wasn't able to get it done. You see, if it comes down to who needs to go, Josh Allen or Sean McDermott, nobody's finna get rid of Josh Allen. You're going to get rid of Sean McDermott. Sean McDermott can find employment elsewhere. Maybe he wins a Super Bowl with another team, but he just doesn't have the code to getting the Bills over the hump. You know, this is eerily similar to the way that Cincinnati Bengals game kind of went. You see, Buffalo wasn't able to stop Joe Burrow, and Bills fans got mad at me because I say that the Buffalo Bills keep getting embarrassed by Joe Burrow, when it's like Sean McDermott's defense got carved up by Joe Burrow when they played a couple of weeks ago on Sunday night, and it got carved up in the playoffs last season. You see, this dude is a really solid coach, but I just don't think that he's the right guy to get the Buffalo Bills to the Super Bowl. And it's crazy because he's built this franchise up. At one point, the Bills, they were one of the biggest laughingstocks in the NFL. There was a point when you could always count on Buffalo never making it to the playoffs. They had one of the longest postseason droughts in sports. And he changed that culture. He changed this franchise around. But it's gotten to a point where, yeah, you may build this thing up, but now you need somebody else who can come in and find a way to take it to the next level. You know, you ever been in a relationship and then you end up breaking up and the person that you was in a relationship with ends up doing all the things that they never did for you in their other relationship? It's crazy how sometimes you can build somebody up to be better for the next person. And for the Buffalo Bills, I think that Sean McDermott has built this team up to the best of his ability, but he isn't able to figure out the missing puzzle piece to getting the Bills a Lombardi trophy. And now it's time to find another head coach who may have the answer to the code. The biggest problem with Buffalo right now is that Sean McDermott, he just isn't it as a head coach. And when you look at how tough the Buffalo Bills schedule is, you got to play the Chiefs. I mean, you got to play the Cowboys. There's no way they're going to be able to make it to the playoffs this year if they lose another game. 10-7 is not good enough to get you in the playoffs in the AFC this year. To make it into the postseason in the AFC conference, you need to win at least 11 games. That's how competitive this conference has been this season. And the Bills shot themselves in the foot when they gave their win away against the Denver Broncos with all those turnovers, all those self-imposed mistakes. They allowed Mac Jones to beat them. Sean McDermott, man, he's the problem with the Buffalo Bills. It's not Josh Allen. Yeah, he's had a lot of turnover-ridden games, but at the same time, he still is the reason why you have a shot at winning the Super Bowl every year. And with his turnover struggles, doesn't that give you more reason to get another head coach that specializes in the offensive side of the football? Sean McDermott doesn't know what the hell to do to solve Josh Allen's turnover issues. And obviously, he doesn't know how to solve his issues on defense because they continue to fall apart in big moments and crucial games and big-time moments. You know, for some reason, Washington just continues to get crapped on by so many people. So Vegas has the Huskies as a 9.5-point underdog against Oregon in the Pac-12 Championship game, despite the fact that they beat Oregon. And I'm getting tired of people saying, well, Oregon didn't really lose that game because Washington outplayed them. They had a couple of fourth down moments that didn't go their way. If they didn't have those mistakes, they would have won that game. Listen, okay, you can make that excuse for why Oregon lost, but at the same time, you're not going to give credit to Washington for stopping Oregon on their fourth down attempts 3 times and giving Michael Penix the ball and Washington going downfield and scoring the eventual game-winning touchdown? That's really odd to me. People are treating Washington like they're not a good team. They're undefeated for a reason. They beat in Oregon State. They beat in USC. Yeah, they've had a couple of close calls like against Stanford and Arizona State. But all that matters is the fact that they're undefeated. And the fact that they're a 9.5-point underdog against Oregon is absolutely absurd to me. If you're somebody who's betting money on this, I'm not giving you any gambling advice. Gamble at your own discretion, but I feel damn good about taking Washington plus 9.5. Not saying they're going to win, but we need to stop propping up Oregon like they're just such this behemoth of a team. They played some really good football this season, but so has Washington. Bo Nix is a Heisman finalist, and so is Michael Penix. We treating Washington like they're not undefeated, like they haven't proven to be one of the best teams in college football. There's a reason why they were ranked in the top 4 last week over Florida State. We got to give Washington some more respect than what they're getting right now. People, ever since they lost to Oregon, were saying it's only a matter of time before they get another L, and they keep on winning games. The sign of a good team is one that can find ways to win, even if they are in games that shouldn't be close. Okay, yeah. Washington wasn't able to blow out Utah the same way Oregon was, and Oregon, they blew the brakes off Oregon State, and that game against Oregon State for Washington was really close. But what about the game when Washington beat Oregon? That game was pretty close. You see, I can only judge a team based on what they do when they play you. And Oregon, yeah, they look like one of the best teams in college football, but so does Washington. People are making this game seem like it's such a giant mismatch when both teams have great offenses. They're stacked at wide receiver. They got really good offensive lines. The only difference between the two is that Oregon starts out fast and Washington starts out slow. But Washington's defense has played some of their best football over the last couple of weeks. You see, I think too many people are so enamored with all the excuses that the national media likes to make for teams when they lose a close game against a team like Washington that doesn't have the same dominance in their wins. Washington is still as talented as what Oregon is. There's not a single position that Oregon has on their offense that's better than Washington's. They're both evenly matched. Oregon has a better defense. I'll give them credit for that. But when they played Washington, they couldn't stop Washington from getting the game-winning touchdown to win the game, could they? When you're going against this Washington offense, which is one of the best in college football, there's not too many defenses that are equipped to stop it. And there were people saying that Oregon was going to blow out USC. And yeah, USC, you know, that game was pretty close. They only won that game 36-27. And Washington, they were going up and down the field on USC. I don't think Washington is this team that everybody makes them out to be. I think that Washington is a really good team. They're an elite team, and elite teams find ways to win close games. College football is a week-by-week sport. You can't judge a team based on what they did last week, because the same team that you saw last week in the Apple Cup may not be the same team that you see in the Pac-12 Championship. It's easy to say that Oregon has been the better team since these two teams played, but people making it seem like Washington isn't undefeated for a reason. They've beaten some really good teams. Yeah, they may have been close, but styles make fights. And this Washington team, they're going to be really amped up when they play Oregon. When you got two great quarterbacks such as Michael Penix and Bo Nix, it's hard to see any team winning this game by 9.5 points or more. And Oregon isn't 9.5 points better than Washington. They've been playing some great football, but it's not like they've been playing crazy competition. They've beaten some good teams, but same thing has Washington. The only difference is that they're beating these teams by way comfortable margins. But I don't think point differential is the determining factor in how good a team is or ain't. At the end of the day, what matters is the wins and the losses. Because you can't judge a team based on what they've done in previous games, because you may not get that same version of that team. You want a good example? Auburn lost to New Mexico State at home and nearly beat Alabama in the Iron Bowl. Hell, last season, Alabama almost lost to Auburn in the Iron Bowl, and they beat the hell out of Georgia in the SEC Championship game. Well, not last year, but a year ago when Bryce Young had won the Heisman Trophy. So you just can't judge a team based on their margin of victory all the time. Washington beat Oregon for a reason. They were better in late game situations, and Kalen DeBoer outcoached Dan Lanning. You see, when your team doesn't execute in fourth down situations and you're going for touchdowns instead of kicking the field goal before halftime, that's a coaching decision. And Kalen DeBoer, when he had to make the better in-game decisions, his team was in a better situation to win than what Oregon was. So, for Oregon to be a 9.5 point favorite against Washington is really crazy to me. And I think a lot of you guys are going to be really surprised when you see the way this Pac-12 championship goes. And I'm not giving you a prediction. I'm saving that for tomorrow's episode. But I'm pretty confident in saying that Washington is going to cover that plus 9.5. If I was to do best bets this week, this game would definitely be on here, because Oregon's a really good team. And even if they win this game, I doubt it's going to be by 9.5. I think people need to pump the brakes a little bit on Oregon. Not saying they aren't good enough to win it all, but so is Washington. Washington's defense has played really good, and they got tons of great wide receivers, and they got Michael Penix at quarterback. The Seattle Seahawks desperately need a win against the Dallas Cowboys on Thursday night, man. Geno Smith, he hasn't looked good for Seattle this year. Now, he hasn't looked bad, but he's been a pretty average at best quarterback. And they got trampled by the 49ers. And they're walking into this game in desperation mode, because the Packers are now starting to get hot. The LA Rams are starting to get hot. And if Seattle loses this game, and let's say LA or Green Bay win this week, one of those teams could end up taking their playoff spot. And it's not just Geno Smith that has played bad. The whole entire offense hasn't played good. The offensive line has dealt with injuries. They got dominated by the 49ers up front. And when Geno Smith isn't able to get any help from the run game, this is when this offense really struggles the most. And they're going against a Dallas team that's playing their best football of the season. But the one caveat that I have about Dallas coming into this game, and why I'm a little bit skeptical about them being able to pull off the win, is the fact that Dallas hasn't beaten a team with a winning record all season long. And yet Seattle has not looked that hot over the last couple of weeks. They've lost 3 out of their last 4. They still have a pretty talented team. They do have a really good defense. The offense doesn't really do them a lot of favors, but their secondary is really good, and they do got a pretty good front seven. But is this secondary going to be able to limit the amount of big plays that Dallas could potentially generate in the secondary? I'm interested in seeing how their rookie cornerback, Devon Witherspoon, who's played at an all-pro level this year, matches up against CeeDee Lamb. You got Tyreek Woolen, who I think kind of has had a little bit of a down year. How is he going to match up against Brandon Cooks? There's a way that Seattle can find a way to win this game if their defense can keep them in it. Dallas doesn't always play their best football against great teams. Are they going to be able to blow out a Seattle team that kind of is a little bit in shambles right now? You see, Geno Smith, last season, he was at his best when Seattle was able to get the run game going and they were able to get the play action passing game going, and that's how he was able to get all those deep throws downfield. We haven't seen that same level of explosiveness. The offensive line hasn't really given him a lot of opportunities to do that, but you're going to need your offensive line to find a way to give Geno Smith time to throw the football and open up running lanes for Zach Charbonnet. This Dallas Cowboys defense, they're not a defense that you want to get into a fight where you have to overly rely on Geno to carry you to a win. Geno Smith hasn't displayed the ability to carry you to wins even last season when he won Comeback Player of the Year. He wasn't carrying Seattle on his back every single game. He's a solid QB, but he's not a good enough quarterback that you can trust to win you a game against a team this good. And with this ball hawking secondary, it's really pivotal that Seattle gets that run game going. Dallas, they need to win this game because right after they play the Philadelphia Eagles. And it's a really good chance that Philadelphia could lose to the 49ers this week. And if that happens, if Dallas wins against Seattle this Thursday and they're able to beat the Philadelphia Eagles, they're in the prime position to be in that conversation for the #1 seed in the NFC, which is really important for a team like Dallas. To have that first round playoff bye, having a home field advantage throughout the playoffs, and having the locked in spot for the divisional round, that means you're only going to need one more win to make it to the AFC Championship. Dallas winning this game means everything for them in terms of them being able to get the 1 seed and keeping pace with Philadelphia for not just the division title, but also for the #1 seed in the postseason. Now, of course, they're going to need a little bit of help because the 49ers already thrashed them, but Dallas is still one of the most talented teams in the NFL. You look at who you think probably has the best chance to make it out of the NFC, it's really only 3 teams. The Eagles, the 49ers, and the Cowboys. The Cowboys, with the way that this offense has played and how well Dak Prescott is playing, they should be good enough to be able to get the job done in this game. But this is still a team that's yet to beat a good team. Who's a good team that Dallas has beat this year that has a winning record? I can't name one. Seattle, at least they were able to beat Detroit earlier this season, and they nearly came close to beating the Bengals, but their offensive line let them down. I'm taking the Dallas Cowboys to get the win. Their defensive line is probably going to have their way up front with the Seattle Seahawks offensive line. They're dealing with some injuries. They got Jason Peters starting out there. That dude's like 40, 41 years old. I'm surprised this dude is still in the NFL. That tells you the kind of situation their offensive line is. Well, their offensive line is in. And with how good Dallas' run defense has been, and the fact that they got a ball hawking secondary, and Geno Smith hasn't been that great with his decision-making this year, I like Dallas to win this game. 31-17 is my final score prediction for this game. You know, when Deion Sanders first got hired by Colorado, the thing that most people were excited about was how good the recruiting was going to be. And initially, I was one of those people that were thinking that Colorado will at least have a top 25 recruiting class due to the fact that they have Deion Sanders as your head coach, because who would not want to play for Deion Sanders? He's an NFL Hall of Famer. He was a historic college football player at FSU. And if you want to know anybody who could help get you to the NFL, it would be Deion Sanders. But for some reason, the recruiting hasn't taken off that way. And I've now started to realize that, yeah, Deion Sanders is Deion Sanders and everybody knows who he is and he's a really polarizing person. Just because you're Deion Sanders doesn't mean that any recruit is going to want to play for you. You're also going to have to sweeten the deal. And a couple of weeks ago, Deion Sanders came out and said that Colorado's not an ATM and they're not going to pay for players. And then a couple of days later, I see a story that comes out saying that Deion Sanders says that his donors need to step it up because they need to be able to pay some of these top-level players. And you see, with Deion Sanders, Colorado's recruiting, to me, has been really disappointing. Right now, they have lost 3 commits in the past 24 hours. Now, at the end of the day, I still feel this recruiting class is going to be pretty good, but not as good as what most people expected it to be. Let's be honest, like, who would have thought that Colorado, their recruiting class, would be only 2 notches better than their rival, Colorado State? And Colorado State plays in a G5 conference. A G5 conference. They play in the Mountain West. Hell, ECU, Eastern Carolina, one of the worst teams in power in all of college football this year. One of the worst G5 programs in America this season have a better recruiting class than Colorado. And USF, another Power 5 program that has another recruiting class that's better than Colorado's. That's extremely disappointing. And National Signing Day is just around the way, but the majority of teams that are in the top 25 already have their signing classes pretty much secure. There's not going to be too many decommits that we're going to see happening. Now, of course, there are other programs outside of Colorado that are experiencing a wave of decommitments, but Deion Sanders, I don't see now one 5-star offensive lineman on this recruiting class right now, and it doesn't look like they're in the running for any of the big ones. I was thinking that Deion Sanders, being as big as a name as what he is, could walk into any recruit's living room and they'll listen, and they're listening, but it's not easy to sell everybody on the idea of playing in Boulder, Colorado, despite the fact that you're going to be playing under Deion Sanders. You see, I was talking to a football player that goes to my university who took an official visit to Colorado, not when Deion Sanders was there, but a couple of years ago under the previous regime. And he said that the university is nice, but, the city around the campus is beautiful, but it's not really a place that's easy to get recruits to want to go and play at. Deion Sanders, he's Deion Sanders, and he's a Hall of Famer, and he's one of the most recognizable athletes of all time, but that doesn't mean recruits are just going to flock to him. You're going to have to need that charm and charisma. You're also going to have to need to open that wallet book, and the fact that they're 65th in recruiting right now, according to 247 Sports, that's not something that I expected out of Deion Sanders. When he first got hired, you were expecting for Colorado to be a really bigger factor than what they are in recruiting right now. Yeah, they were able to flick Cormani McLean and Travis Hunter, but how many other top-level 5- and 4-star guys are they going to be able to get to come to Boulder and play? Colorado, I think the approach that they're taking to build this program up is putting more focus in the transfer portal because that's a quicker way to improve your team, and there's no problem with that. But it's just, you expect the recruiting to be a tad bit better than what it is. It kind of seems like Deion Sanders thinks just because he's Deion Sanders, recruits are going to want to play for him, and it doesn't work that way. You still got to be able to have money to pay these dudes, and the donors do need to step up. You feel me? If they want Deion Sanders to make this a championship-level program, they need to have championship-level players. And that involves you having to dish out a little bit of bread to get those kinds of players, especially on the offensive line. But let's not act like the recruiting isn't underachieving right now. The fact that there are G5 programs that have a better recruiting class than Colorado right now is extremely concerning to me. And these wave of decommitments, everybody goes through them, but I don't really see why people would be decommitting from Deion Sanders when this is somebody who is a pretty likable guy. A lot of people seem to really connect and fuck with Deion Sanders. So the fact that you're losing a 4-star quarterback in the 2020 class that is top 10 at his position, it concerns me a little bit. And maybe there's something going on behind the scenes that we don't really know about, but I'm not saying Deion is a bad coach. People make it seem like I'm hating on Deion Sanders, but I still believe in him. But the more I keep up with Colorado football, the more I start to realize that Deion Sanders isn't the coach that I initially thought he was when he first got hired. You see, at Jackson State, he was a big fish in a small pond, but in, Division I college football and the Power 5 conference, he's looked like a big fish in the ocean, pretty much. You see, it's going to take more for recruits to want to play for Colorado than just being sold on the idea of, I'm Deion Sanders, I'm a Hall of Famer, and I can get you to the NFL. I think Deion Sanders' lack of coaching resume, being able to win at the highest level, really hurts him. And I was thinking that at least Colorado would be somewhere in the top 30. Vanderbilt has a better fucking recruiting class than Colorado right now. Why is it that Vanderbilt's having a better time recruiting and they're higher than Colorado in recruiting and they're not even good? And they've sucked for years. So let me know what you guys think about the current state of Colorado's recruiting. I think that they're taking the approach of they want to build their team through the transfer portal. And I do think that they're going to have a lot of success in the transfer portal this offseason because they got Shedeur Sanders. Regardless of how people feel about Shedeur Sanders, it's pretty obvious that he was the glue that kept this team together. Because when he got injured against Washington State, they looked awful. And even against Utah, if they had Shedeur Sanders, they probably win that game. Shedeur Sanders is a great leader. Anytime Colorado needed him to come through in big moments, he delivered outside of when they played Stanford. And even then, he's the kind of player that these players rally behind. They love Shedeur Sanders. The fact that people believe that the offensive line is deliberately setting him up to fail, I don't believe that to be true. Everybody loves Shedeur Sanders up there. He's a great leader. He's somebody that players want to play with. And he's also one of the best quarterbacks in college football. Even if you're a hater, you got to admit that he's going to be a top 3 quarterback walking into 2024 next season. And receivers want to play with that. They playing with a great quarterback increases their chances of not just getting seen and noticed, but making it to the NFL. So I do think that there are players in the transfer portal that want to play for Coach Prime and Shedeur Sanders at Colorado. But the recruiting, on the other hand, is a lot different. Because you got to be able to open up that checkbook. And I would at least thought that the recruiting for Colorado would be in the top 30 right now. And I don't think National Signing Day is going to come around and they're immediately going to go from 65 to a top 25 class. You haven't really seen them really hit the recruiting trail as hard as what you would have thought they would when he first arrived there. I would have thought that this would have been a great recruiting class right now. But the fact that USF and Eastern Carolina have better recruiting classes than Colorado is massively disappointing to me. This is it for this episode of the JT Sports Podcast. I appreciate you guys for tuning in. We're going to be going live later on today with college football with Sam, giving our preview and predictions for the conference championship games. But I appreciate you guys for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode, leave a like, subscribe to the channel. Remember that every episode of the podcast is available in audio format on all podcasting platforms: Apple, Google, Spotify, Amazon, wherever you get your podcast from. The JT Sports Podcast is available.